Hello, I'm Mark Davenport, and welcome to the Wisdom Factory. And I should warn you, first of all, folks, that we have very limited bandwidth, and strange things are happening technically here. So, anyway, this is the Wisdom Factory, so it must be Friday evening here in Italy, from Friday morning in America, and this is a forum for people who have experience, knowledge, and wisdom that they want to share with the world. And we've been doing this for over a year, every week, and we've had some previous series, one on wisdom technologies, and we had one on conversations that matter, and we have community gatherings now and then. We're deeply interested and committed to raising consciousness in the world, and we follow Ken Wilber and his integral theory, on our best days anyway. Okay. We are coaches and counselors, and we are presently working on the topic of relationships. And today is our third episode of this series. It's a 12-part series about wisdom in relationships. And we call it cleverly, Stop the RelationshiT. Grow your relations. And we have 14 experts operating here from our integral worldview. And one of those is here today, and that is Dr. Keith Witt. Hello, Keith.
Hello, Mark. Hello, Heidi. It's good to see you guys. Margherita, good to see you guys.
Okay, wonderful. And we're titling this session, Loving Completely, How We Can Learn to Keep Our Intimate Relationship Alive. And we should say that Dr. Witt is a licensed psychologist, he's a teacher, an author, and has lived and worked in Santa Barbara for over 40 years. And he has had, he says, can you believe it, over 20,000 hours of FaceTime with patients.
It's actually 55,000 hours.
Oh, gosh.
55,000?
Yes.
Okay. I guess I was reading something out of date. Well, Dr. Witt is the founder of the School of Love at www.drwitt.com, where
It's
he
Dr.
offers
Keith Witt.
his
drkeithwitt.com.
drkeithwitt.com. Okay. Where he offers his School of Love lecture series, blogs, a Therapist in the Wild web series, which is always fun, and integral conversations and videos on health and love, relationships, sexuality, spirituality, development, and it's too much fine print here. Psychotherapy-related topics.
Give it over to him and ask him to
doesn't
answer.
matter.
Well, okay, we'll stop there.
Okay, good.
Pass it over to you, Keith, for any corrections or additions.
No, that's fine. That's just fine.
Okay. Well, Heidi and I know you from a course we took, it was about over a year ago now, I think.
Loving Completely.
Loving Completely.
But we know you for much longer for the Pandit and the Shrink.
Shrink and the Pundit.
Pandit.
Yeah.
Yes,
Not the Pandit, the Pundit. Okay. So we have enjoyed your conversations with Jeff very deeply, Jeff Saltzman, and hope to see you again on there soon. But anyway, we invited you because, one, we knew you had no trouble talking.
I have no trouble talking.
Okay, and so and your information is just absolutely priceless with the background that you have. And I think you had a question you wanted to start with.
Yeah, I have a question, Keith. And, you know, I'm 63, and my first marriage was with 19. And it stopped too late. And then I said, next time, it shouldn't be like this. And then, you know, again and again and again. And I think this is the experience of many, many, many people, that they don't want to make it end in the same, or more or less the same way. And we really put all our will into it. And then the love goes away, and we begin to to even hate each other. And then it's a breakup and it's very hurtful. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that, how that comes. Why isn't it not enough to want to make it better? And I mean, later on, what can we do?
Sure. There's been an awful lot of great work on what constitutes a satisfying, intimate relationship and what constitutes a miserable relationship. Lots of detail. John Gottman has studied it probably most with social research. David Data has wonderful material, spiritually based in the masculine and feminine. Alison Armstrong comes from an evolutionary perspective, phenomenological perspective. Esther Perel, David Snarch come from a sex therapy perspective. Susan Johnson, emotionally focused therapy from an attachment perspective. Stan Tatkin from an attachment and interpersonal neurobiological perspective. All these approaches have understandings of what is a wonderful relationship and what is a disaster relationship. And really, they all agree. Sometimes they pretend to not agree, but I think that's mostly ego. I think if you actually look at the work, they all agree. And from an integrally informed perspective, integral is a meta theory that organizes other theories. They're all right. They all fit together. And in my work and in my writing, what most fascinates me is, since we have all this great information, as you were saying, Heidi, how come everybody isn't in a great relationship all the time? How come the best predictor of divorce is marriage? How come the kinds of patterns that you're describing keep happening? And people have difficulty changing them. And the answer to that is, of course, complex. The reason for this is development. Self-aware consciousness is relatively new from an evolutionary standpoint, and we're still growing into the capacities for evolutionary development. And so as we have ego development, so our relationships also develop. And what these need to do is harmonize the drives. Now, human beings are genetically programmed for a variety of contradictory kinds of relationships. We're programmed to pair bond. We're also programmed for serial monogamy, as you were describing, Heidi. We're programmed to be unfaithful when we have an opportunity. We're programmed to want to have a position on social hierarchies. We're programmed to, from very earliest on, our nervous systems are programmed to defend ourselves when we're threatened in particular kinds of ways. When we defend ourselves from other people, we make other people disappear as psychological beings. We have to justify running away or attacking and so on. And of course, we learn patterns of relationships starting from before birth and then going forward. And so you can never suppress a drive. The drives have to be integrated and harmonized. And as people develop, as relationships develop, they become more demanding. And right now, in the modern age, the modern intimacy is the most demanding and conditional love that's ever existed. And because of this, there's a lot of problems that happen. And these problems somewhat come from ignorance. And so there's information that we can get that will help us love better. And some of them come from an inability to observe ourselves. And we can learn how to observe ourselves better. Some of them come from a lack of willingness, a lack of commitment to make intimacy work. Some of them come, and we can learn how to commit in more profound ways to each other. Some of them come from a lack of resolve to be an autonomous, healthy, growing, happy person. All of us were raised on various fairy tales that said, if we have the right person loving us, then we will be a happy, healthy, autonomous person. And that's both true and not true. if you're not an autonomous, happy, healthy, growing person to start with, no matter how sexy and beautiful and wonderful your lover is, ultimately they're not going to make you autonomous, happy, healthy, and growing. You have to have that individual commitment. And in a modern relationship, it requires two people having that commitment to themselves and then having a commitment to help each other grow throughout a lifetime. Now, everybody likes that idea. How come we all don't do it?
Well, you just told us why. The list of difficulties to overcome, makes it just miraculous that relationships continue. Happy, good relationships.
I would like to say something. You said our love is conditioned, and I agree. Normally in a couple, and there is now this spiritual thing, unconditional love. Everybody tells you must love unconditionally, and I tried that. I read the Course in Miracles, and I had a person which I afterwards found out was a borderliner, and I tried to love unconditionally and excuse everything, and that was not right either,
No, never love a borderline personality disorder person unconditionally, because they will eat you up. They will gobble you up.
He did. Right? He did, yeah.
I had one of those too.
Well, so that's an example of, unfortunately, someone that has a personality disorder is not adequately attending to being an autonomous, healthy, growing, happy person. Now, with borderline personality disorder, you can learn to be an autonomous, happy, healthy, growing person, but you have to face the fact that you have problems and address them. Which brings me to the first skill that is required. The first skill that is required to have happy relationships that continue is the skill of self-observation, self-attunement. And then secondarily, equally important though, is the ability to attune to another person. And attunement is simple to describe, it's hard to do consistently. And I'll just describe it right now. If everybody takes a deep breath and is aware of the breath going in and out of your body, be aware of what you're experiencing in your body with acceptance and caring intent. So as you breathe in and out, be aware of what you're experiencing, what sensations you have in your body with acceptance and caring intent. And as you attune to your sensation, be aware of what emotion you might have. Are you interested? Are you bored? Are you happy? Are you sad? Be aware of your emotion with acceptance and caring intent. And as you're aware of breath and sensation and emotion with acceptance and caring intent, be aware of your thoughts. Thoughts drift in and out. Thoughts sparkle. Thoughts persist. Thoughts intrude. Thoughts make us feel good, make us feel bad. Be aware of your thoughts with acceptance and caring intent. And as you breathe and you're aware of your sensation and your thought and your feeling with acceptance and caring intent, be aware of your judgments. At this moment, you have judgments about yourself, about me, about the world, about political situations. God knows we have judgments about everything. Well, be aware of whatever judgments you have right now with acceptance and caring intent. And as we're aware of sensation and emotion and thought and judgment with acceptance and caring intent, be aware of what you want at this moment. I want a sip of water at this moment, so I'm going to have a sip of water. What do you want at this moment? Be aware of what you want with acceptance and caring intent. And now you're attuning to yourself. This is a practice that we can do all the time, and I do it all the time, but I encourage everybody else to do it all the time. Now, as I do this, I'm aware of myself. I can extend my attention, and I can look at Mark and Heidi, and I can imagine, I wonder what's happening in your bodies. What's your sensation? What's your emotion at this moment? What's your judgment at this moment in feeling and desire with acceptance and caring intent for you? And now as I extend my awareness into you with acceptance and caring intent, I'm attuning to you. This practice creates a new set of sense organs in our consciousness. Sight, the five senses are just the first five senses. There are many, many more senses. And this attunement to ourselves and other people, these are additional senses. And then there are more senses beyond these. There's spiritual senses, and there's psychic senses. There's pain body senses. There's lots of sensory capacities in human consciousness. We have yet to find the limits of them. So this level of attunement gives us the capacity to self-observe and to observe others with acceptance and caring intent. That acceptance and caring intent is crucial, because not because we're going to feel it all the time, but because we'll notice when we're not feeling it.
Yeah, it's exactly what I wanted to say, because, for instance, myself, I have always observed myself from childhood on, but this was for other reasons, to figure out how I need to be and how I not need to be, and it was always with, you are wrong, you know?
Yes.
So what the crucial word is the acceptance and caring intent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the thing is, I mean, I notice in myself that I'm going to learn it. I'm learning it, you know, to be much more acceptance. But how can we learn that?
Acceptance.
Acceptance and caring intent to myself, instead of always wanting to punish me and say this is wrong and you could do better.
Oh, I'm
blah,
so
blah,
ashamed
blah,
of
blah.
myself. Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, shame is a social emotion that's necessary, actually. And I wrote a book called The Gift of Shame to illuminate the importance of shame as an affect, and it has its necessity for love, relationships, and spirituality. But all the emotions are two-edged swords. All of them can injure us as well as help us, as well as shame. But to answer your question, this is a lifelong process. A necessary part of human development is we learn self-observation from a moral perspective. We learn about right and wrong starting very, very, very young. And it's necessary. It happens in the play space, what Winnicott called the play space, between 10 and 20 months. And in that space, children get approvals and disapprovals from parents. And the disapprovals cause shame reactions, sometimes alarm reactions. The approvals make them feel good. And their nervous systems are learning right and wrong. They're learning what works and what doesn't work. And this is necessary. All human societies have this. And so our shadow selves, our adaptive unconscious, develop standards for how we're supposed to be. And as we develop a theory of mind at 2 and 3 years old, we begin to observe ourselves following standards or not following standards. And if we don't follow them, we'll feel shame emotions, sometimes fear emotions. Their nervous systems program protection from those shame or fear emotions, or those extreme senses, with defensive states. And in defensive states, our nervous system has amplified or numbed emotions and destructive impulses and distorted perspectives and diminished capacities for empathy and self-reflection. These are designed to protect us when we feel threatened by another person, and to protect us from scary feelings or threatening feelings in ourselves. We do not have the neurological capacity to self-regulate these until we're at least teenagers. So up to that time, they need to be externally regulated by caregivers and imperfectly regulated by us. And so all human beings have normal crazy. All human beings have defensive states. In relationship, my defensive states naturally constellate with yours, because that's what relationship does. When we're in the same, when we're connected, we start constellating intersubjective fields. Right now, everyone that is on this call is constituting a large intersubjective field of all of us, and then little intersubjective fields between me and you. Because I can see, Mark, you and Heidi, you and I, through mirror neurons in our nervous system, and other sense organs, are constituting intersubjective fields with each other. When we're pro-social, this is great. And when we're falling in love, this even goes further, because falling in love is an altered state with amplified intersubjectivity. But when we're threatened, we constitute shared defensive states, defensive patterns where your defensive states and my defensive states organize with each other to separate us. And if we just let the defensive states go, it creates either dramatic separation, painful separation, or escalating conflict. And escalating conflict is one of the things that is most destructive for relationships. And leaving each other, not having contact with each other, deserting or abandoning each other is another devastating effect. And when we're in relationship with someone, when we're in that lover relationship, when everything is turbocharged and amplified, our defensive states are sedated. They're sedated with dopamine and testosterone and vasopressin and oxytocin. And it's easy to be obsessed with each other and to love each other. As we pass out of romantic infatuation into intimate bonding, 6 to 18 months usually, but it can be longer or shorter, the defensive states show up. And if we can't perceive them, if we don't notice them, they start running the show. And they have small patterns that can happen in a few seconds, and they have large patterns that can happen over a period of years. And so you begin to see people having the same kind of argument over a couple of minutes and the same kind of relationship over 5 or 6 years. Now this can be changed, but the first thing that we have to do is, one, we have to self-observe. You know, am I in a pro-social state or am I in the defensive state? And the second thing is we need to normalize the fact that there is a form of entropy that happens in relationships that pass out of romantic infatuation. They begin to gradually go south. One writer, I forget his name, said, when you're in a relationship and you pass out of romantic infatuation, it's like you're on the Mississippi River and it's taking you down to the ocean, and if you're not paddling upstream, you're going to end up in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's true. And again, the way that you do that is you begin as early as possible being very interested in whether you're feeling admiring and grateful for your partner and fulfilled in your relationship, and whether your partner is feeling admiring and grateful for you and fulfilled in your relationship. This is developing another sense organ. So everybody out there, just imagine your partner. Most of us have partners. Wherever they are, and they might be just next to you, like Mark and Heidi are next to each other. Yeah, there you go. Well, just, first of all, do you have a sense of feeling grateful and appreciative and admiring of that person at this moment?
Absolutely.
Do you feel fulfilled? Okay, so you two feel fulfilled, and so people listening, do you feel fulfilled and admiring and appreciative? And if someone was going to ask your partner right now how they feel about you, what do you think they'd say? Do they feel fulfilled? Do they feel appreciative, admiring? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. If you believe that they do, then the partner that you carry around with you is a secure person. It's somebody that loves you and appreciates and admires you. And if they feel that way about you, then the person that they carry around in you is a person that they're secure with. So if you're aware of that dimension, and you ask yourself every day, some days and some moments, you're not going to be feeling admiring and appreciative. You're going to be feeling pissed off and just contemptuous. And sometimes they're going to be feeling that. Yeah. And so if you notice that, then at that moment, the agenda in the relationship is to return to love.
Absolutely.
In loving completely, the third star is, if in conflict, would this person be able and willing to do what it takes to get back to love? Now, getting back to love doesn't have to involve a big fight. It can just involve feeling a little indifferent. Okay, so to me, being indifferent to my wife is not acceptable. There's a problem, and so I want to do something so that I'm feeling appreciative and grateful again. And her feeling indifferent to me, I want to help her with that. Right? And so now, to add another complication around this is, if I am dedicated to being an autonomous, healthy, happy person, The only way that I, as a human being, can do that is I have to be able to receive influence and act on influence from loving people. If I can't receive influence from other people to be better, then I am not going to be an autonomous, happy, healthy, growing person. That's just all there is to it.
And you know, I think also that we have to learn. And a big learning curve I made here with this little guy here is to be able to accept love.
Yes.
You know, to really be able to be receptive. I always was in the false belief I have to do everything, blah, blah, and be perfect. And he always laughed when I made an error. And he said, good that you made an error. Now you become human.
You're not perfect.
Yeah.
You know,
took a load off me.
Took a load off you. You know, Alison Armstrong, when she says the qualities that make a man charmed and enchanted with a woman, the qualities that make him want to claim her and care for her is she confident? Is she authentic? Does she have something that's passionate? And is she receptive? And receptive means, does she enjoy what's best in him? And this is true for us. If we enjoy, we're not receiving from our partner unless we're feeling the pleasure of receiving. Our pleasure tells us when we're receiving. If you're being kind to me and I feel no pleasure, I'm not receiving your kindness. And so the capacity to receive, to feel the pleasure of receiving, is another skill. It's another sense organ. And so it's another yoga that, if we don't practice, can cause problems. And because defensive patterns most likely happen in our most intimate relationships, the best and the worst will come out in our most intimate relationship. And if we're not aware of it, if we don't have the sense organs to see it, then it will act in certain progressive ways. And if we don't have the resolve, the commitment to address it and come back to love, it'll accelerate in a particular fashion. And if we don't have the knowledge of how to do it, we'll end up being frustrated. And if we don't have the ability to receive influence from wise others, we can't get the knowledge and the direction to be able to love each other and continue to love each other effectively.
You know what you are saying, first of all, is the commitment. The commitment
Yes.
to really want to stay in this loving relationship with the partner. And whenever these negative things come up, to be willing to look at them and see what is my part and what is his part.
Yes.
Separate these things and then know what emotions and handle for my own emotions, because when I'm angry, yeah, it's me who is angry. You know,
That's right.
He might have done something, but it's my emotion and not him, and vice versa, no? And and we found a very good understanding in that, you know, from the very first moment. And I want to tell you, I was at the moment, we knew each other for a while in internet, and then we came together. And I noticed that these old things, behaviors, wanted to come in. And I said, shall I do, it's not so important, and go over it, or name it? And I said, no, I name it. I say it. It's no danger. If he goes away, I am alone another bit. It's no problem. And so I named it, and we worked through it. So the first, let's say, half year was the most difficult. Things came up, and we had to work through it. And he had to take over also his responsibility for the things, you know.
So many unexamined things.
Yeah, and he was not so much aware. I had done all the trainings with Catherine Woodward Thomas and Claire Sammet and all the coaches training, so I was sort of aware what is there in the false beliefs and the patterns and so. He only had this intuition that when I say these things, I might be right. And he always was open to that, because we had this commitment that whatever shows up, we are willing to look into it, everybody for themselves and as a couple. And we renew the commitment every 14th of February. Yeah. It's now soon.
Coming up.
That's great. So first of all, there are, as you notice, there's two different kinds of commitment, and both of them are good. The beautiful thing about integral, what drew me to it, and what causes me to be an integral practitioner and an integral writer and integral theorist, is everybody gets to be right. The initial commitment that we have when we meet somebody is, I'm going to stay with you as long as it feels right in my heart. I'm going to stay with you as long as you're a sane person. I'm going to stay with you as long as I feel fulfilled. I'm going to stay with you as long as. So as we do that, we get to know each other over a period of time through great times and bad times. We begin to discover how we deal with ourselves when we become normal crazy and even extra crazy. We learn our abilities to give and receive influence, our abilities to get back to love, our abilities to deal with problems. And at a certain point, we shift from I'm going to stay as long as to the commitment of I'm going to do what it takes to make our love work. Because I have faith in you as an autonomous person committed to health and growth and love, that you're going to do what it takes, and so I'm going to do what it takes. And so that means when there's we want to have the kind of great stuff that we need to feel mutually fulfilled on a daily basis. But also if there's a problem, we do exactly what you just described, Heidi. I look for my part, because I have faith that you're going to look for your part. And two people in a conflict really looking for their part of the problem resolve that conflict pretty darn fast.
Yes.
Two people focused on the other person's part of the conflict have an escalating conflict, and it goes straight to hell. And we've all had experience with both of them. And so now this is incredibly challenging, and that's why there is no unconditional love. In fact, the higher you go on the spiral, the more ego development you have, the more demanding, the more conditional love becomes. And it's in a way it's a brutal physics that as we become more aware and have more capacities for sensitivity of attunement, then we have more responsibility to notice irregularities or problems in those attunements. And the more injured we become often when there's a betrayal or a desertion or an attachment injury of some sort. And so this is one of the reasons that couples, as they become more intimate, begin to have more and more of a requirement of transparency, of integrity, of monogamy. All the couples that, God bless everybody who enjoys polyamory and has open relationships and all that kind of stuff. And certainly I tried all that stuff in the 70s. I guess I had some fun. I would have had more fun if I was more monogamous, frankly. But, a lot of us do the adventures. But as people go deeper and deeper, they realize that the quality of the container of an intimate relationship has tremendous demands. And it's a demand for me to bring my best self forward on a daily basis and to be in integrity with you and to do my best to resolve it and repair it if I injure you, and to do my best to be open to resolving or repairing if I'm injured by you. And this is important because most people end up in therapy after they've had problems for 6 years. Okay, well, you can imagine, people who come in and they'll be just hating each other. And they haven't had sex in a year or something, or something, and they'll be talking about how it was great 8 years ago, and then it started getting bad. I'm thinking to myself, and sometimes I'll tell them, it sure would have been great if you would have come in when it stopped being so great, rather than waiting 6 years after it got bad, because there have been a lot of injuries, and there's been betrayals, and there's been affairs, and there's been a reinforcement of negative patterns, and people are very habitual. Human brains if a habit's associated with survival, it doesn't want to give that habit up. This is one of the things that makes PTSD so difficult to treat. Brains associate those traumatic reactions with protection, don't want to give them up. So you have to do an awful lot of work to reconsolidate those memories. And so going back to your original question, recognizing that we're always, the marital entropy exists, you learn the sense organs, the attunement. You learn to check in with whether you're fulfilled or the other person's fulfilled. And every day you pay attention and you normalize the fact that sometimes it's not going to be working. You acknowledge it and then make it work a little better. And sometimes that's easier, sometimes it's harder. If you can't do it with each other, fine. Go find a therapist and let the therapist help you work on each other. The sooner you get at this stuff, the better. The more wounds that you take into a relationship from childhood, the more individual work you have to do to be able to love well. And that's just the way it is. And so if we take on that mission, the promise of modern intimacy is incredible, because it's a tantric process that takes us both to unity with God and with each other. But it's very demanding. And so the patterns will take over, suffering ensues. It takes two people making these commitments and having this ability. If one person doesn't have it, then the person who grows will grow away or set boundaries. If you have a personality disorder, you got to resolve your personality disorder before you can have stable relationships. Borderline personality disorder is a good example of that. So you got to do the 3 or 4 years of concentrated work that's required to resolve borderline personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder is like that. It can look like you're having great relationships, but you're not. They're shallow. And so you have to go to your narcissistic wounds and heal them, which again it's actually, narcissists appear less scary and they're less dangerous in borderlines, but they're kind of more messed up, because it requires more effort to go through the glow of I'm the greatest to I have injuries that block my ability to be intimate with other people. It's possible, but it requires a lot of courage and a lot of resolve and a lot of commitment.
So
you have been an advocate of monogamy very consistently.
Oh yeah.
And I'm not sure if everybody who's listening would feel the same way about that. So you might want to say why you are so much in favor of monogamy.
Well, first of all, it's not exactly that I'm an advocate. I'm more of a, if Integral makes us all into scientists. So what Integral does is we have pure spirit on one end and we have pure empiricism on the other. And Integral is a meta theory that combines everything. So what I've observed is that with almost every human being, people can have relationship forms that are non-monogamous forms, and they can have a lot of fun, and they can have a lot of intimacy, and they can have a lot of love, and they can have a lot of integrity in those forms if they have agreements, if they don't violate boundaries. Now, people will get injured, but they get injured clean rather than unclean, But the bottom line, though, is as you progress in an intimate relationship, deeper and deeper and deeper, there are levels of engagement, levels of mutuality that can only be accessed in a monogamous relationship. If your partner is available to have sexual adventures, your partner is at risk to fall in love with another person. After a certain level, or you're at risk to do the same. After a certain level of bonding, the relationship can't tolerate that. And you discover yourselves, there's 2 kinds of eroticism. There's real eroticism with people, and then there's fantasy eroticism, okay? And both of them are important, okay? So gradually, as you progress into deeper intimacy, in real eroticism, you really kind of have to do it monogamously. Now, I'm a great believer in fantasy eroticism going wherever you want it to go. In one study, I think 34% of men had fantasy sex with over 1,000 different women. I'm a great believer in that. Great, have fantasy sex with as many people as you want. That kind of satisfies that urge, that polygamous urge, because we're both monogamous and polygamous genetically. But in terms of the level of intimacy that I'm having with one person, that container really tends to require monogamy. And I imagine, I suspect there are couples somewhere where they have that level of depth and they have an erotically fulfilled relationship with each other, and they can sustain sexual adventures with other people. That tends to happen most frequently with gay couples and with and couples where one of the people are bisexual. Those couples more often have arrangements where they can have sexual experiences outside of monogamy than in heterosexual couples. And I haven't seen any data about how that affects their level of intimacy, other than those relationships tend to be shorter than heterosexual relationships. And so I imagine there's an algorithm there that people will explore more fully in the future. If they're not doing it already, I'm just not aware of the research.
Keith, I have a different, another question. Sometimes my English is a little bit wrong. You are saying be in love, be in a relationship is hard work. So this is the exact opposite to what we are listening to in the music and what is in the films. You know, it's all easy, blah 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 blah. So how can you inspire people? I mean, you do it in your work to do that work. What does it need first for the people to come to you?
Well, usually what it takes for the people to come to me is nothing else has worked. Everything's going to hell, and they found out about Keith. So, and half the time people will come in and they'll say, we have communication problems, and which is fine. And they'll come in going, we have communication problems, and the subtext is, my partner is horrible at communicating. You know, fix him or fix her, and then everything will be great. Right? And so that's where people start. Now, that's just because I'm a psychotherapist. It can't. I'm an advocate for starting education about relationships, intimacy, and eroticism from birth onward. I think it ideally is part of a much more explicit part of the cultural instruction. And now we have enough science supporting what constitutes great relationships that it's beginning to work its way into schools. For instance, the nonviolent communication or mediation, for instance. Nonviolent communication and mediation is not the natural way that children solve problems. If you take two kids having a conflict and let them do it themselves. You know, when I was a kid, they'd say, my parents were both teachers, and I had two brothers, and they would say things like, let them figure it out for themselves. Well, if you let kids figure it out for themselves, 8 times out of 9, one kid will successfully bully the other kid, or one kid will successfully flee. It requires skill to regulate your desire to bully or to be bullied, and to move further into a cooperative stance of mediation. This is now being taught in elementary schools and in high schools. This will have effects and is having effects on the culture. And one effect that we have is that the physical and psychological violence is much more immoral now in the culture than it was when I was a child. Okay, so that's, in that sense, what a friend of mine said, the progressives always win. And I with the caveat, in a stable society, the progressives always win. That's true. And so this is how the culture is changing as we move into the integral age. And so I'm hoping that people will have more and more data about themselves, about defensive states, and about intimacy as we move forward. People will occasionally come to me when they're dating, and they'll say, well, what can we do to keep this going? And then I have an opportunity to teach them some of the stuff that I mentioned earlier. Though I always have to give them bad news. This romantic infatuation glow that you are in at this moment is not going to naturally last forever. You can, through practices, have it continue throughout your life episodically. It won't have the same natural omnipresence that it does when you're in this other altered state. But couples that are high on intimacy and satisfaction, when they're put in the scanners and they see pictures of their partner, do have the same in-love circuits light up as the people that are newly in love. Now, those aren't the only circuits that light up. There are a lot of other relational circuits that light up in long-term partners that don't light up in people that are recently in love. And that just is the include and transcend nature of everything, including intimacy. But it requires effort. And one last thing. Yes, it requires effort, but learning how to dance requires effort. And so we're all clumsy, and I learned, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and so we're at first and we're real klutzy, and it's forced, but then say we get really good at dancing. Then when we dance, we have the subjective sense of abandonment. Because we have up-leveled our implicit memory, our procedural memory, to be able to sustain those practices so that it feels like we're just going for it. Okay? So we can have that experience in intimacy but we do have to learn the steps and we have to practice them. And then as we do that, creates a platform from which we can have lots of ecstatic experiences, and we can laugh, make each other laugh, and we can have great sex, and we can play together. Mark mentioned when we talked earlier how important play is. Well, he's 100% right about that. If you stop playing with your partner, that's a problem, and so that needs to be addressed. If we're not playing, let's create some situations where we can make each other laugh and we can play. In fact, one study, all they did with these couples is they had them watch 5 romantic comedies together and talk about them. That's all they had them do, and then they had a bunch of couples that didn't. And the couples that watched 5 romantic comedies and talked about them were doing better 6 months later just with that one intervention, because they watched them, they laughed together, they saw people in love, they resonated with it, and that had an effect that up-leveled their relationship.
This is so
wonderful.
This is so great that now there are scientific studies about that. And what you mentioned, that they begin now in schools to teach a little bit of nonviolent communication, because for me, at least in my generation, nobody taught us how to relate. In our family, 5 children, we didn't really relate. It was a sort of competition, and my parents neither. And how can you learn it if you don't have role models first? Mm-hmm. Or if somebody teaches you? You have then to learn it by yourself if you want it, and you feel inadequate because you don't know how to do it, and always fall into the same pitfalls, And I think it is important to tell people that it's not their fault. It's not really their fault at the beginning. Then, when they continue to fall into the same things, that might be a little bit their responsibility. But initially, it's just nobody taught us.
That's right.
Now you have to teach yourself.
I completely agree. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. So, I discovered psychotherapy out of a psychotic state. I mean, I was in a psychotic depression and was hospitalized when I was 15. My nervous system could not tolerate the culture in 1965 in the United States. The way that I'm wired, it just, given the tools of processing reality that I had been given, didn't make any sense, and I went crazy. Now, when I decided to become a therapist, when I decided to become a martial artist, the contemplative tools, the self-regulatory tools of martial arts, combined with the spiritual and psychological tools of psychotherapy, made me sane. I mean, now there are frameworks where I could begin development. I had some organizing principles, and you're exactly right. If you don't have the tools or the awareness, then what happens is your natural states, the drives, will do the best they can to get you through. What my parents' generation were taught, where you stay with somebody no matter what, and if you're not satisfied, that's fine. Our generation, my generation, was taught you expect fulfillment. In other words, fulfillment is great. Marry somebody because you're in love. But we weren't taught that there are responsibilities associated with that. And if you don't take on those responsibilities, you're not going to end up feeling fulfilled. Now in the integral age, we go, yes, we want to have fulfillment, but there are responsibilities that we have to embrace. And not just to our partner, to ourselves. And that's what makes intimacy demanding. But it's worth it. Health is demanding. You got to exercise. You got to sleep. You got to eat healthy food. You got to take care of yourself. But the benefits of health are wonderful. Okay, well, but it's demanding. And you have to be responsible for yourself. It's the same way with love. It's the same way with eroticism. It's the same way with being together.
You're talking about the past couple generations and the changing understandings of what a relationship is and what you can expect from it and what you have to do. So this is natural to ask, what, Dr. Keith, is the future of love? Where do you see it going? What have we not gotten to yet? So to speak.
As we enter the integral age, more and more and more people are in the second tier. There's where we have a felt appreciation for multiple points of view, where we have diminished fear of death, where we have a heightened sense of responsibility to serve each other and to serve the world. And so the relationships that arise out of that are extraordinarily beautiful. Now, the hard part about it is that we're by nature competitive. Human beings are competitive. It's part of how we're wired to have position in social hierarchies. And so couples will be angry with each other because they're not 3 or 4 developmental levels farther than they are at this moment. And a very common thing with couples is I'll ask them, well, who do you know? Who are the exemplars? You were talking about exemplars earlier. Who are the exemplars? Who are the couples that you know that are happy with each other as friends, lovers, and partners? And it's amazing how many couples say, we know no one. You know, people will say, well, you and your wife seem to be that way, but you're my therapist, you don't count. And I go, okay. And so there will be more of those couples, so more of those Paul Newman,
Joan Woodward.
Yeah. There'll be more of those couples. There'll be more and Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt couples, you know, where they do the work to love each other. There'll be more couples that are exemplars that help us grow, and also we'll begin to develop standards off of the kind of information that I'm describing. As I said, all these researchers have, and all these theorists have very, very, very clear ideas about the behaviors and the habits that destroy relationships and the behaviors and the habits that help relationships. That is not a mystery. You know, we all know that. So increasingly the standard will be to go with the behaviors and the habits that work. Now, in the future, my sense of this is that you're going to have couples that are way more cross-generational than the couples were historically, where they can there's a sense of they can hang out. For instance, the millennials that I work with, more than any other generation, go to their parents for wisdom than any other generation before them. Why? Their parents are the boomers who were into personal growth. They've decided, and they also were into being child-centric, for better or worse. I mean, usually for better, but there's problems with that. And they just maintain contact, and we have more connectivity because of all the electronics and so on. And so I did not go to my parents for relational wisdom or for any other kind of wisdom for that matter. Not because they weren't great people, but because they had no idea about the world that I moved in. Okay, so millennials now feel more known by their parents. Because now, remember, felt appreciation for all points of view, you can see the other value memes and have an appreciation for the healthy and unhealthy expression in them. That creates more connectivity in families. That creates more sharing of influence. You know, flexed flow means, and natural hierarchy means at any given time, somebody is going to know more than me about something. And if I'm up to influence, if you know more than me about something, I want to hear about it. Okay, and I want to receive that. This is dramatically different than past generations. Dramatically different. In fact, people do not realize how different the zeitgeist is now. And of course, you don't really notice previous worldviews until you hit the second tier, and then you can see your previous worldviews. So the integral people are looking at it and going, "Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!" A lot of the orange and green people they're just kind of normalizing the fact that the worldviews, the zeitgeist has changed dramatically in educated parts of the world over the last 3 generations.
This is such a good news that we are beginning to be able to collaborate and not see in a relationship only fight and I'm better than you, but that we can give the relative wisdom to the other, because it's not one side who is, let's say, better or more advanced. We have these different lines. I can be better in music or something, and he can be better in politics or whatever. I mean, I go the outside abilities, but it is never that only one is the teacher and the other is the student. We can cross-fertilize each other in many ways. And we have to pay a little bit attention on the time. We are sort of at the end. We have a public blab, and I see there are many of our faithful followers like Hans and Richard and other people, and Ulrike is here too, and we would invite you to come into the blab, and when you have time to go there too and speak directly with the people, because today I couldn't really bring in the comments. I didn't have the technical means, let's say in this way. So but before we close, I would give Margherita also a moment to tell us. She graciously assisted me, and she would have been the fire woman in case we would have done these things differently, because we have really a whole lot of challenges here at the moment. So Margherita, I would like to give you the possibility to give your takeaway, and if you want to ask some of your very personal questions to Keith.
Well, I am so amazed, Dr. Keith, you are amazing. So I did a little drawing on what you have said, and so it has to be, you know, loving, caring acceptance of the field, and then we have the energies around the sexual parts and the head part, but we must come from acceptance, and then this whole thing is igniting, right? And then we can be in the hell or heaven, but we have to be responsible. And then there was commitment and adhering, admiring, and fulfilled. We have to feel. And then whenever there is a problem, return to love.
I love it. It's beautiful. Send me a copy.
Oh, sure,
Please
I can take
me
a copy. Yeah, all right. And so what I was thinking about when you told the story about your, you know, when you were 15 and had this wiring in your brain, you know, I think that that's a very good illustration of someone who actually exactly know what they're talking about, because they've experienced it, and that's the same for me. I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm an intuitive healer, but I became that because of all these patterns that is inside of my body, got triggered by all these men in my life. And so this is like my learnings, my schooling, to be with the partners I've had, and I came to a situation where I really don't need a man in my life. It's nice if I have one, but they're there. But I have my autonomy, and you know, I'm so happy. I don't call myself single, because I'm whole, something like that. So that's my takeaway of confirmation of that you don't have to be single, you can be whole.
Yes.
And
very
nice.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening or sharing your experiences and what you've told us. So that I'm really, I love it.
Yeah, and we thank you
too
very, very much.
And good work, Margherita. And you know, single women live longer than women in unhappy relationships, and there's a reason for that. Oh, I can't hear you now.
Yeah. So yeah. I'm on my 60th year now, and I've never been as happy in my life as I am now.
That's wonderful.
Okay, we are getting the message that this computer where we are communicating is almost out of battery. So we are at the end of the hour, and I think we finish this broadcast and then hope that on Blab everything will work out better. We thank you really, really very much and give you maybe 1 minute. Oh, here's the plug.
Oh, here's the plug, but it's too late. 9%.
Okay, maybe we make it for the closing.
Yeah.
Give you the possibility for a last word without which you wouldn't go out of this session.
To believe in your capacity to be an autonomous, happy, healthy, growing human being. Believe in yourself. That all of us are vessels of spirit on earth. We are God's hands and eyes and minds. And we are none of us alone. We're all born in relationship with each other. And we're all able to love deeply. So don't give up on that. Commit to that in yourself. And as you do that, find the people around you that are committed to that. And allow yourself to give and receive love with them. And if there's a special person, create a relationship with them. And when you do, expect problems. Intimacy always involves suffering, and that's fine. But address those problems and remember to use that relationship to love, to play, to have fun, to have great sex. And if that's not happening, go, well, let's make it happen. Don't attack each other. Create something. It's possible for all of us to do that, and we can start at any time in our lives. And so if you're doing it already, God bless you. Keep doing it. And if you're not doing it, start at this moment.
Yeah,
Okay.
This is wonderful.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And see you hopefully later, and see everybody hopefully later on the Blab. In about 15 minutes, we will be over there.
Yeah.
And when you Google Dr. Keith Witt, you find everything. So I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So thank you that you have assisted,
so
that you
much.
have prayed to the internet gods. We really had to go from one computer to the other and then to the next one. And yeah, we made it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.